The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of Insights. I'm joined by ACC Professor of Political Science, Tim Kuhnlein. Tim, thank you for being here.
Good morning, Aaron.
So we're going to talk about President Trump's cabinet picks and kind of the turmoil that's going on with that. To start, we'll do with someone who was confirmed, and that was Betsy DeVos as Secretary of Education. So let's talk about why her pick was controversial, how she ended up getting confirmed, and kind of what's the turmoil behind that.
Well, it was indeed a close call. I mean, it was a 50-50 split with the Vice President being the deciding vote in the Senate. But really the controversy, I think, around Betsy DeVos is here you have a multi-billionaire that has really had no direct relationship to public education other than as a critic of it, which is part of the agenda. But I guess that begs the question, what does she represent? And the primary concern is, I think, that this proposal or potential proposal of vouchers being facilitated at the federal level to allow federal monies, the suggestion is somewhere around $20 billion would be channeled through block grants, to foster experimentation, further experimentation with vouchers. And this relates to charter schools, which is already existing in our country. A good over half of our states have charters, but vouchers is another area, and it's a stepping stone towards greater and greater privatization, using U.S. tax dollars to shift money away from public non-for-profit institutions, our traditional schools, to private institutions, many of which are for-profit or religiously based. And I think herein lies the real controversy.
And so let's talk deeper about those vouchers. So these vouchers take taxpayer money, and the people that use the vouchers can use that money towards another school system.
Yeah, that's right. And there are about 13 states right now that allow vouchers. And there are about 50 private school choice programs in about 25 states where vouchers are used to also include transfer of tax dollars along with the students to religious schools. And so this is crossing some really stringent boundaries of our Constitution and our politics, what's wise, what's not wise. And I think the larger question is what is it ultimately working towards? Many argue it's working towards privatization, pushing towards a for-profit agenda. But it's also diluting, we already have a question of the amount of money that we spend on public education. It's large, but obviously it's not translating. If we allow for money to be shifted from traditional schools to these other options, we end up diluting the concentration of wealth in any one of these options. And it begs the question, is it really translating to better performance outcomes? And the statistics just don't bear out. Where Betsy DeVos gets into a little bit more controversy is that she's very much in favor of non-regulation. So she is not in favor of regulating these charter schools or any of the voucher-related recipients. And in Michigan, we have one of the worst records. And a lot of it is that a lot of the problem is that we just don't regulate, and yet we allow these failing schools to continue to operate because they can still be profitable for whoever's running them, whether they're just surviving or actually creating profit from a private sector company that's running them. And most other states, we have a high level of regulation. There are 43 states that allow charters, as opposed to the vouchers, which is only 13 states. But where we run into problems is that the lack of regulation is allowing for too much confusion about the outcomes, which should really be the final driving force behind this.
So her view on public education is controversial, and her kind of distance from it throughout her life is controversial. So let's talk about her confirmation hearings, and they were kind of the most fiery ones out of anyone, really. People were really going after her for these things, but she ended up getting confirmed, but she had a couple of Republican senators voting against her, which was kind of unique in this sense.
Yeah, she was very evasive. Of course, there's a larger agenda here, and she was evasive, but also, I think, and behind the scenes kind of being a bit provocative. There's no question here that Betsy DeVos is behind a massive anti-union movement, and feeling that somehow public schools are stifled because of the union presence. And by shifting money away to charter schools and other options, you get away from the union dynamic. But the first day on the job, she sends out this provocative sort of tweet that may have been joking, but to suggest that she wanted to start sharpening pencils in order to, and she couldn't find the pencils, wondering where they were if anybody knew. It just kind of sends a message to public educators, particularly in secondary and elementary ed, that have to provide for a lot of their own classroom materials. And then, of course, she was met by resistance when she tried to enter a Washington, D.C. public school. They just basically blocked her from entering. So she's creating, like so much of the Trump administration, these highly sensational, this highly sensational rhetoric that is in many respects probably going to cloud any real deep sense of contemplation about these options and the pros and cons. But this is the way we're playing the game now. So,
and let's talk about the vote that made her the Secretary of Education, because it was a split. It was a 50-50 tie, and then Vice President Pence was the person who was able to, give her the vote ahead. So let's talk about, is that like a historic thing to happen?
It's historic in the sense that it doesn't happen very often, and certainly on nominations. But this comes back to the controversy and the sort of the sensationalized, hyperbolic nature of this administration and where we're going. This is going at a snail's pace. And one might argue there's a lot of obstructionism on the part of the Democrats, although that's not the total equation. He's nominating a lot of highly controversial people on a lot of highly controversial subject matter. And Flynn is probably the most extreme version of this. Betsy DeVos was able to squeak by. What her policy implications will be is still very uncertain. It's the federal level. But when we look at what's going on in the intelligence community, if this is any indication of what's coming for education, the confusion, the disorder, we're kind of on the verge of a constitutional crisis in many respects, because the lack of respect is deteriorating so much because of these hyperbolic gestures that are creating a lot of lack in trust and really not knowing what to believe anymore. And maybe that's the objective, to disorient people and to deconstruct, but that's a very dangerous path to follow, whether we're talking about healthcare or education or our national defenses in terms of intelligence. And for a movement that's supposed to be the conservative side of the equation, this is very troubling to a lot of people.
All right, well, we're going to continue this conversation on the cabinet after the break, so stay tuned because there's more insights coming up.